Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'm very grateful to the Academy for inviting me here today to speak at this conference and tell you a little bit about our Polish experience from the refugee crisis at the beginning of the war between Russia and Ukraine, and actually not only about the direct involvement of authorities during this war, but also what are the lessons learned from this experience and how did they impact our general evacuation policy. So as moderator has already announced, I come from the State Fire Service. So we are directly employing 30,000 professional firefighters who are dislocated across the country, but we are also managers of the whole rescue system in Poland that consists of few hundred thousands of professional and volunteer rescuers, first responders who come to the scenes of day-to-day emergencies as well as big crises. And of course, it's a very interesting and a very challenging experience of what has happened in 2022. And here you can see some of the statistics that show the scale, the overwhelming scale of the refugee crisis that we experience in Poland. And as you see, the peak day of arrivals in Poland, 140,000, more than 140,000 people crossed the border only on the 6th of March 2022, just a few weeks after the war started. And by the 7th of March, we had already 1 million crossings from Ukraine into Poland. And by the end of April, here you can see the number of the people who stayed in the country. Just to show you some more statistics and tell you, the number of citizens in Warsaw was increased by 15% over the first weeks of the war. And if you, for example, see one of the cities that is located in the eastern side of Poland, close to the border with Ukraine, namely Przemyśl city, it's about 50,000 inhabitants. But during the first 5 months of the war, more than 1,200,000 people crossed through the city and 300,000 people stayed at least one day in Przemyśl. So you can see the scale of what we have experienced. Some very encouraging, I would say very encouraging statistics. It's not only about the response of the public sector, it's not only about the response of the civil protection, but it's the whole of society response to the crisis, which we have seen in Poland. And actually 77% of Polish citizens, more or less directly, been involved in the support for Ukraine, and 7% of them took refugees under their own houses. You can also see that 500,000 refugees from Ukraine benefited from the shelter in accommodation arranged by public authorities. And if you wonder how many of them stay over time, so by the end of 2022, we had around 80,000 refugees still staying in our public accommodation facilities, and by the end of 2023 we had 40,000 of people who are still using these facilities. It's not only about providing direct humanitarian assistance, it's also about providing social life inclusions, and you can see that 960,000 Ukrainians found a job in Poland without the need for permit, and you can also see how many of the children benefited from education and from, for example, free meals in schools and kindergartens. And that's the statistics. And let's see what was the planning. What was the planning for the refugee crisis? And if you ask me whether we have analyzed the possible threat to the national security because of the influx of the refugees from abroad, I would say yes, that is something that we had in our risk assessment, although because of the lack of the experience, we just had some foundation that helped us to mitigate all the challenges that emerged during the crisis. As you can see, we have a national level crisis management plan. The crisis management plan is available online, so you can download it should you be interested in the more detailed descriptions. So yes, it consists of around 20 main risks for Poland, and you can also see the matrix of responsibilities of different institutions. Throughout throughout the crisis management cycle. So it's not only about response, it's also about prevention, preparedness, and recovery. And it also includes some standard operating procedures, and one of these standard operating procedures is dedicated to the mass influx of people into the country. As you can see, the national coordinator for this task is the Ministry of Interior and Administrations, but the main execution lies within the regional and the local governors. So the governors who possess power not only to use their own offices, but they possess power to take advantage of all the services that lie within their territories, that cooperate with them within the local and regional crisis management teams. But the procedure also includes supporting roles for majority of ministries and agencies that exist in Poland, as actually for each of them you could find a role in the during the refugee crisis. Currently, we have defined 48 tasks, so it's in the current procedures, in updated procedures, not in the one that existed at the beginning of the war. The 38 tasks that deal with reception, humanitarian assistance, and was quite a new way, is about also social life inclusion. Of course, our legal framework at the very beginning of the war was not adapted to the scale of crisis we have experienced. So that's why already 3 weeks after the beginning of the war, the government and the parliament adopted the new emergency act dedicated for support for Ukraine. And as you can see, it was primarily about giving access for the Ukrainians to legal residence and social benefits in Poland, but also about giving access to education and possibility, for example, to conduct business activity. Of course, this emergency act was amended a few times, for example, to enable clear funding lines for NGOs that were involved into the response of the crisis. And for us, as the State Fire Service, it allowed us to collect and donate equipment for the colleagues from the State Emergency Service of Ukraine. From the perspective of civil protection authorities, you can see 3 threads of the involvement of our authorities. So first of all, it's a direct support to refugees in Poland, and there are some examples I will show you how we, as a fire service, were engaged into the response. But it was also about delivering humanitarian aid to Ukraine, both for citizens of Ukraine as well as colleagues from the State Emergency Service of Ukraine. And finally, strengthening preparedness in case war spills beyond the border of Ukraine. So as a director for international cooperation, you could experience at one time three calls. One of the calls was coming from the NGO. You don't even know that it existed, and it comes from abroad, and they just want to offer their assistance to refugees in Poland, although you don't know about their capacities and how they can do that. At the same time, you are receiving a call from another institutions that is already delivering humanitarian assistance, and they want a warehouse in Poland to bring the assistance to, so that the colleagues from the Ukraine might pick it up. It's also challenging. And at the same time, it is an American army that is calling you because they're establishing a base in Poland and they need some host nation support. So that are the challenges that you need to meet at the same time while dealing with the crisis. Here comes the direct engagement of the State Fire Service. So first of all, transport of refugees and equipment, transport of refugees from the borders to the reception points and then throughout the country. We had quite a lot of buses within the fire service, but these were not enough. We used buses and drivers from other services, plus we needed to establish a hotline with a private market so that we could hire private market buses, you know, to arrange the transportation of the people. The whole process of transportation costed around 15 million euros. Support at the reception and accommodation points, it does not require any very specific skills. It's just a manpower that helps to set up accommodation centers and offer any assistance at the scene to support refugees. Coordination of volunteers at railway stations, that's a kind of interesting lessons learned that emerged a few weeks after the war emerged. So there were plenty plenty of people arriving at the railway stations, and there were plenty of organizations, but they were not coordinated. The organizations didn't know about other organizations at the same railway station, and someone needed to coordinate their activities in order to make them really effective. And that was the role for the firefighters. We were also hosting families of State Emergency Service rescuers from Ukraine in our facilities, and we've been also participating in the Medevac train operations. So the Polish government organized the medical evacuation train that was traveling from Ukraine to Poland, bringing both soldiers but also civilians, not only directly affected by war, but also those who needed to evacuate from the regions of Ukraine that were affected by war, and their medical processes were put on hold and needed to be continued in Poland or then their countries too. Finally, we were delivering international assistance to Ukraine, and we have been also coordinating deliveries of international assistance from other countries. International dimension of civil protection engagement. So yes, we have activated Union Civil Protection Mechanism, first of all for vaccines, because it appeared that the schedule of vaccination in Ukraine is different than in Poland. So we needed additional doses of vaccines to support the process. Then accommodation equipment, so not about the shelters, but about the equipment that is used within the shelters, within the accommodations, as we were missing enough capacities in our country. We've also established a UCPM Medevac hub. It's not the task of the State Fire Service, but it's a cooperation of Ministry of Health, Polish Center for International Assistance, European Commissions, as well as IOM and WHO, that together set up a Medevac evacuation hub from which patients from Ukraine are brought to the hub. It's close to the Polish-Ukrainian border, and then transported by airplanes to different hospital facilities across Europe. The same goes with the logistical hubs, both for Union Civil Protection Mechanism assistance, as well as for all those international partners who offer assistance outside of the hub. So joint activities of the State Fire Service, as well as the governmental governmental agency for strategic reserve, so the agency that was established during the COVID pandemic to support building up reserves and distribution of necessary materials, and it proved extremely useful. Finally, it's about political advocacy. It's about bringing Ukraine very close to us, bringing Ukraine to the Union Civil Protection Mechanism, and also advocating among the groups of like-minded countries for the more focus of Europe, and not only on the geopolitical challenges and geopolitical threats that are already visible especially in Eastern Europe. Challenges: unprecedented inflow of refugees, so our standard reception was overloaded within 72 hours. Lack of any pre-existing templates that could support our work. It is extremely difficult to coordinate transport without a central IT tools. For example, to match drivers that come from different parts of countries with the people that want to travel to different parts of countries. To provide a good registration of drivers to avoid this, for example, the risk of human trafficking. Accommodation pressure at cities, and some of the facilities, their daily activities were put on hold because of the need to accommodate refugees. Limited stockpiles of any infrastructure that is necessary to support the crisis. Majority of arrivals were, of course, women and children. Because of the martial law introduced, the men needed to stay in Ukraine. So it comes with a strong need for family support, for childcare, for education continuity, for privacy protection. Please remember that women and children are more prone to exploitation. And yes, there were different examples that the people could be exploited while being at the same time victims of the war. Vulnerable groups, they need to be properly recognized, registered, and they also need to have very dedicated solutions. Psychological support. psychological support, it is extremely important. It's not only about, for example, providing the psychological assistance, but also about our internal discussions, whether we should use, for example, as we do it in Poland, we should use sirens to commemorate different, different days as we do in Poland. Some of local governors decided not to use sirens to not increase the stress of Ukrainian refugees who are used to hearing sirens during air raids. Temporary accommodation fatigue of refugees and those who help after some time, and the disinformation and scams that was really happening at the border. So the people were informed that the border is closed, that you can cross it only using the passport, or that we are bringing refugees to the post-war concentration camps. That was really crazy, and there is a need for for immediate policy to prevent and to react to such information. Competences fragmented. We cannot avoid fragmentation of competences. We can only make all of authorities more aware of the need, to cooperation and about, their responsibilities in case of crisis. Need for rapid policy adaptation. Limited experience with mass registrations that came up with the quiz for the people who are getting an individual registration number, PESEL, that allowed for access to social benefits. Financing of spontaneous volunteers unclear until this emergency act emerged, and also the issues of integration and management of information, and also maintaining data privacy rules. So we are acting very spontaneously, but at the same time, some standards should be definitely met. No legal requirements for the mass evacuation plans at the beginning of the war, a limited logistical base, and there's also a risk of over-reliance of social goodwill. So we have seen that after some time, the spontaneous volunteers who do not work for the NGOs that are solely dedicated, to social and humanitarian assistance, at some time they come back to their daily activities, and they expect the government to take care of the activities. Although, of course, there are plenty of NGOs that are still very active and very helpful in terms of support for Ukrainians, but public authorities need to really correspond with them and have a very good policy of joint cooperation. Central command, need for integration of operational, social and communication aspects. Pre-established frameworks between NGOs and public authorities, and what was missing at the beginning of the war, ready to use mass evacuation plans that could support the work of local governors in case such crisis emerge. Scalable, easy to adapt reception capacity that would enable us to convert the already existing infrastructure into accommodation facilities. It's not only about just bringing beds to the schools or trade halls or anything. No, there are much more needs that are required in this regard. Digital registers proved extremely useful. Integration of IT tools, as I told you. Coordination of volunteering, and I have already told you by the example of railway stations, predictable funding lines for NGOs, and need for clear public information and anti-disinformation strategies. For example, we were using, it was not only about social media monitoring and providing people with brochures and directly speaking to them, but for example, we used our SMS warning systems that could send SMS in Ukrainian language only to the holders of the Ukrainian SIM cards, so that we could also communicate with them. Surely hotlines and mobile info stops were established, but of course there was no time to properly train personnel, so everything was arranged very much on the spot. What was very good is that there was a consistency among the web pages, so we managed, for example, as a government, not as a fire service, to create a one-stop shop page for all donors of assistance and for refugees seeking for the assistance, so that they do not need to look for any other pages. Yep, early focus on integration, social, long-term integration. So it's not something the civil protection authorities think in the first place, as a first place, but it is something that is required in a longer term, and the emergency reception must be linked with integration phase management. Very shortly, what are the lessons learned and how did they impacted our policy? So since the end of 2024, we have a new act on civil protection and civil defense that defines tasks, authorities as responsibilities for peace and wartime scenarios. We're extremely missing act that is dedicated to the wartime scenarios, and now we have it, and it is followed up by the investment plan I will tell you about. So yes, there is a need for mass evacuation plans. We do have repositories of both human resources and the infrastructure and in-kind assistance that could be used for different crises. We provide courses for administration at different levels. We make a bigger coherence of our early warning and public systems, and we are working also on designating protecting standards. There is executive regulations to the act that deals with evacuation of populations. So it's mainly about really commanding local and regional governors to think beforehand what would be the evacuation needs and what are the capacities they possess, they can use in both evacuation as well as reception of refugees in the country. So there are some totally new ideas that were included in the guidance for the evacuation plans that are being currently established. That we will have a national evacuation plan, there will be the regional evacuation plans, but also the local and local crisis management plans will have a dedicated part on evacuation of population. And here comes the investments that we are currently having. So we have a budget of 0.3% of GDP dedicated to civil protection, of which half of this budget is a totally new investment, totally new budget that is dedicated for civil protection, civil defense related activities. So besides the daily, let's say, rescue activities, and here you can see what are we planning to purchase. It's also about preparing for another refugee crisis, for example, by purchasing transport equipment dedicated to transport of medical patients. But that's just one of many examples how the investment program can be used. And last but not least, what we are paying attention to at the international level, Poland is currently holding a presidency in the Council of the Baltic Sea States, and we believe that it's a high time to propose having macro-regional mass evacuation preparedness arrangements. It's not maybe not only about having a macro-regional mass evacuation plan, but at least having some joint understanding and arrangements that could be useful for all the countries, as we have quite many of scenarios in this area of Europe that could realize and need for international cooperation. Stronger advocacy of like-minded countries after our presidency in Europe, we do see that it's not exactly a risk that is understood throughout Europe, and of course such countries like those in the Baltic Sea states community and all those in the eastern part of Europe have joint priorities that we need to stronger advocate, because these are not the priorities of the whole Europe. Sharing experience for and from Ukraine, and you are doing very well, because also it's very good to have colleagues from Ukraine also on during this conference. So it's about learning from them, but it's also about helping Ukraine to come closer to our community. And bilateral and multilateral investment projects, they can also be done with the use of dedicated international funds. Last but not least, some pictures from the Polish presidency in the Council of the European Union that was very much dedicated to communication in civil protection in case of really mass crisis that could affect Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A couple of questions from the audience, and as I promised, I go by the popularity. Was there some kind of prioritization principles applied to what kind of groups of refugees were helped first, or there was resources available for everyone?
Actually, we found out the need to prioritize the especially vulnerable groups. And to be honest with you, at the beginning of the war, there was no such prioritization. The issue is now that if you see now in the guidance for the development of the mass evacuation groups, yes, it prioritizes, for example, the people with disabilities, the people who need to be supported and transported, who, for example, children that need to be properly registered and to be prevented from, for example, human trafficking and other kinds of exploitations. But yes, at the very beginning of the war, it was an ad hoc solution.
Okay. Let's say, in addition to the National Fire Service, were you or are you today supported by expert volunteers also? What's the experience?
Yeah, actually, no, we would not make it without the volunteers. We would not make it without the volunteers. And actually, my advice to the civil protection authorities would be that do not look only into the, let's say, authorities that you know from, let's say, the rescue experiences, because the whole volunteer movement can really help. And we have plenty of experience, not only from the mass evacuation, but, for example, from the recent floods in Poland, for example, when the organization that helped us to coordinate the volunteers was the organization that was responsible for establishing a local festival, because they have a know-how on how to register people, the proper, infrastructure to print badges and so on. So that's how you can also take advantage of the whole volunteer sector, not only the volunteer fire brigades. We have plenty of them, but the movement was extremely big during the crisis.
As we are running a civil defense conference, then what was the Polish armed forces' involvement, if any, in coordinating and managing the refugee crisis?
Yes, it was, and actually, it's not only about having a fully professional soldiers, but since few years we have also a dedicated army that is, let's say, a part-time army. So these are people who are running like their daily activities, but at the same time, just like being a volunteer firefighter, they are also participating in this special kind of the army. So yes, they helped, and it was a very all kinds related, all kinds of activities related, to the direct support of refugees, starting from the border through the reception centers, accommodation places, and so on. But at the same time, we also had arrangements with the army on how to support, for example, the American army that was setting up in the Eastern Europe. And now it is necessary for the civil protection authorities to communicate with the army while preparing mass evacuation plans to decide on the routes and so on. So because we might have competing needs during the evacuation crisis. So yes, it is now required to communicate with them.
Refugees with pets, was this a problem? And how did you solve it?
Pets. Actually, I'm not sure about the current plans, but in the previous plans that existing for many years, unfortunately, they ceased to exist. They ceased to exist at the very beginning of the war. But still, some local governors were using these outdated plans. But it was necessary, to provide a certain support for pets, and included also, for example, the way how you transport them and the minimum requirements for transportations. I'm not exactly sure about how the issue of the pets was solved during the crisis, but for sure the involvement of the veterinary services as well as NGOs was extremely visible. So yes, there were some grassroots activities that supported the taking care of pets. Yeah. So we were allowing people to go with pets.
I have a last and most simple question, but shortly. If any of this, let's say, serious situation hits Poland or other countries, what would be your first recommendation regarding, let's say, the whole organization of this work and the refugees? What to do? What is the main learning point?
Establish a crisis management teams. Establish a crisis management teams and meet with stakeholders in your area, whether it's a local area, regional, or even the national one, because it's the first thing, to properly mitigate the crisis is to know the stakeholders that might be helpful. And it is now, it has been a requirement But even in these mass evacuation plans, now it is necessary, for example, to involve representatives of the NGO sector into the crisis management teams.
Management is everything. Thank you very much.
Thank you.